What happens if I refuse a breath test in the state of Florida in regards to a DUI or DWI investigation? That has a myriad of answers. And what I mean by that is, if you refuse a breath test, there's two separate potential effects that it will have on your case early on. And in particular, I'm talking about a first-time DUI. If you refuse, there is an administrative suspension that comes into play. It is a 1-year license suspension. Now, potentially, depending on how you move forward with the DHSMV suspension, you can have a hardship for that entire period of time. If you don't accept the suspension, you challenge it, or you don't in some way try and preserve your license, you will have a 90-day window where you can't drive at all, followed by that 12-month period where you are on a hardship or business purpose only license. So that's the first and immediate effect that occurs. Now, if you are successful in challenging the DMV, you can get your full license reinstated, but that is a very low percentage of cases, and obviously a very different topic for a different video. In this situation, though, understand there's license revocations coming into effect. If it is a second refusal, so if you've previously refused a breath test, you could potentially be looking at 18 months of no driving under any circumstance. So no hardships, no business purpose only license, nothing. So that's a very significant and serious outcome in regards to refusal. Okay, if it's the second time you've refused a breath test. Now, in regards to the criminal aspect, back to a first-time situation, if you refuse the breath test, what it does is essentially turn it into more of a subjective allegation. So without a breath test, which is a scientifically validated reading or measurement of what the breath alcohol level would be in a criminal investigation, it then becomes subjective. The state gets to use the refusal in argument against you, and something called guilty conscience. And the state will always do this. They'll argue, well, they didn't take the breath test because they knew they'd blow over the legal limit. That may or may not be the case, but that would be the argument they get to use. But it also deprives the state of, as I said, an objective scientific measurement. So it can potentially help your case criminally. It all depends on the circumstance. Every DUI is unique. They all have their own individual issues, problems, strengths. So to sit here and say a blanket statement of you should always refuse is not necessarily the case. What I am saying is it may or may not help your case. It may or may not hurt your case, depending on what other evidence exists, such as video of the field sobriety exercises or an individual at the time of driving, the driving pattern itself. Things of that nature may validate that the refusal was in fact because somebody believed they'd be over the legal limit and therefore they lock in together. So again, there's no blanket statement of you should or should not refuse. Generally, if you do not give them the breath test, then they don't have, again, the objective measurement of what the blood or breath alcohol would be. If it is a second-time refusal in the criminal realm, there is an additional criminal charge. So, on a first refusal in a DUI, there is no criminal charge that comes into play. But if you refuse a breath test for the second time, it is a misdemeanor, first-degree misdemeanor charge of refusal to submit to breath testing. That is its own independent crime and is potentially very difficult to defend against, because all the state really needs to do is show evidence or proof of a prior refusal. Doesn't matter why that refusal took effect, but it did. And then a refusal in this circumstance. So the refusal aspect can have, as I said, a myriad of outcomes on your case, and can have a myriad of outcomes on your licensing and the results of the criminal charge that will likely come forward. It's essential to contact an attorney so that they can go over your individual case, the individual facts you have to deal with, and what defenses we would have to preserve and be able to use to try and help you through this process.